Paul Finebaum is drowning in the Ole Miss Kool-Aid. He believes that they're legitimate national championship contenders going into this season, and I agree with him. If he's drowning in the Kool-Aid, I'm swimming in the Ole Miss Kool-Aid along with him. I believe this year, Ole Miss is going to be very similar to what last year's FSU team was, but more talented. Because the way FSU assembled their 2023 team is kind of similar to how Lane Kiffin has went about constructing this Ole Miss team. You know, like, they don't dominate in recruiting, but they're not bad in recruiting. They're pretty solid. And then they also mix their solid recruiting in with being absolutely dominant in the transfer portal. And this is a top 7 team going into this season. The Lane train is chugging on all cylinders down there in Oxford, Mississippi. Ole Miss, they're coming off their best season in program history. They had their first ever 11-win season. They took down Penn State in their New Year's Six bowl game. They returned 71% of their offensive production from last year. You got Jackson Dart at quarterback, who should be viewed as a legitimate Heisman contender. And they're stacked at wide receiver. They returned, 3 out of 4 of their top 4 receiving leaders from last year's team. And plus, they got Juice Wells out of the portal, man. Like, it's just like with the transfer portal, Ole Miss just seems to not be able to miss. And I never knew that Ole Miss had this much access to the kind of money that they've been throwing out there with the NIL and the portal and recruiting. They do lose running back Quinshon Judkins, which definitely does hurt. And it definitely is going to be a loss that they're going to feel. But they got enough talent at running back that they should be able to overcome losing him. And he caused a lot of locker room problems. Great player, but just wasn't worth the headache. You got Useless Bentley, who's a dog. He was averaging 5.7 yards per attempt, and he also had 4 touchdowns. And they recently got Henry Parrish, I believe, who played for my Miami Hurricanes. And I was a little bit shocked to see him transfer out. I thought he was a pretty good back, really powerful. He's going to be somebody who could be really good in short yardage situations. And they went all out in the transfer portal to not just make sure that they improve their offensive line, but they got a lot of help on defense. Their defense was non-existent last year. Anytime you watch Ole Miss play, it seemed like damn near every single game was a shootout. One of the best games from the 2023 college football was Ole Miss versus LSU, because you knew that game was going to come down to whoever got the ball last. LSU got the ball last, but somehow by a miracle, Ole Miss defense was able to get them off the field and seal the victory. Well, this year, there's no more excuses for Pete Golding. If this defense isn't at least a top 40 defense, he has to get the pink slip. You got Walter Nolan, who was the second best player in all of the transfer portal during this cycle. You got a dude who has an extremely hard to pronounce last name from Florida. You got linebacker Chris Paul from Arkansas, cornerback Trey Amos out of Alabama. All 4 of these guys should have big impacts on improving Ole Miss defense this year. And they also have the SEC's easiest schedule this year. You got to play some school called Furman. Like, let's do a little challenge real quick. Try to point out where Furman University is on the map. I bet none of y'all can do it. You got to play Middle Tennessee State at home. You got Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, on the road at South Carolina. So going into that LSU game on the road before your bye week, you should at least be 4-5-0, 6-0, right? Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, South Carolina, 6-0. LSU, you have to play them on the road. We know how tough it is to win at Death Valley, but I'm not convinced that LSU's defense is going to be that good this year. And I really am starting to view Brian Kelly as just a tad bit overrated. It feels like he peaked his first year at LSU, because ever since that first season, LSU hasn't really lived up to the hype. And then after that LSU game, you got to play Oklahoma off your bye. Then you got Arkansas, Georgia, another bye week in Florida, Mississippi State to close out the season. What has me so excited about Oklahoma is that their defense is going to be really good, and they also have the potential to be a team that could surprise a lot of people. But Ole Miss, from a talent standpoint, They got the advantage over a school like Oklahoma just with how well they've gone about utilizing the transfer portal. Like, they got some of the transfer portal's best players on defense. Like, a lot of these guys that they have coming in were at least top 100 players or better from 247 and On3's transfer portal player rankings. And when I'm thinking about the team that has potential to benefit greatly from the college football playoffs expanding to 12 to eventually 14 teams, it definitely is Ole Miss. When it was at 4 teams, it was going to be really tough for Ole Miss to get into that thing because their 2 worst losses of last year came to Alabama and Georgia, and they lost those games pretty handily. They got smacked by Alabama 24-10, and they just got absolutely obliterated and, sent off the map by Georgia. I don't think that's going to be the case this year, though. I definitely believe that they have a good enough team that they should be able to give Georgia somewhat of a dogfight. And this Georgia game is the only game that I don't see Ole Miss being able to win. Outside of Georgia, every game on this schedule should be winnable for them, and I expect them to win. They should be at least a one-loss team playing for at least vying for a spot in the SEC championship. And I have them penciled in as a lock for the college football playoffs this year. When it comes to them being the national championship contender, hell yeah. Like, they just beat Penn State in their bowl game. And I don't want to hear anything about Penn State having all these damn opt-outs when they recruit at a way higher level than Ole Miss. You feel me? So Ole Miss this year, I already told you guys a few months ago, I already got my tickets for the Lane train. And I hope that you guys got yours because that thing is about to leave station and they're about to take off. They are a really hot team that many people have been high on. A lot of people have been talking about Ole Miss. They're not overhyped. This is a season that Ole Miss has been building for a while now. And I don't even think that Lane Kiffin even expected to have Ole Miss in this kind of position. Like, every single offseason, there's always speculation about how Lane Kiffin could leave for another job, and yet he still continues to remain the head coach of Ole Miss. You want to know why? Because he realizes with this new era of college football, the transfer portal, NIL, he's found the way to work it in a way that he has a good balance between utilizing the portal to get guys who can come in and have immediate impact, but also finding guys that, they may not be able to start right away, but 1 or 2 years down the line with some good development, they could turn into impact starters. And then you mix that with recruiting, and that's how you end up having an Ole Miss team that is a lot similarly constructed to what Florida State was last year, because Florida State was doing the same thing. So I expect Ole Miss to be more than just hype. Like, Paul Finebaum, he definitely has a point with Ole Miss this year. If there was a team that could win the national championship that isn't a blue blood, Ole Miss definitely could be that team. With everything they have coming back, what they've acquired from the transfer portal, they're going to have a good defense. They should have a good defense. You mix that with how stacked they are on offense. I mean, yeah, they definitely are one of the best teams in college football, and they definitely have a very great shot at winning the national championship. I definitely would have them labeled as a national championship contender.